With how the pride community has grown exponentially within the past decade and it being represented in almost everything everywhere, it's time to determine just how beneficial or harmful this movement has been. I'm Josh, and let's get started with a simple topic. There's been a lot of debate on whether two biological males who date each other but one identifies as a woman are both gay.
Chase, would you rather smash the hottest trans woman in the world or the oldest woman in the world? Honestly, bro, the oldest woman in the world, because then I wouldn't be gay. Are you like, what? Chase, how dare you be transphobic?
Yes, actually, what the f do you mean? Yes.
What makes someone gay depends on their sex, not their gender identity. If two biological men identify as non-binary, they're still gay. But let's say that being gay is based on someone's gender identity instead, okay? Then what about people whose gender identity is otherkin or therian, who are usually people that identify as animals? If non-otherkin and non-therians date them, would that not be considered bestiality? What about people who identify as trans-age, identify as babies or toddlers? Are trans-aged people able to date 10-year-olds? Is that not pedophilia? Since most biological men prefer to date biological women and not trans women for various reasons, it's caused trans women to basically guilt-trip men to date them.
So if the only reason you don't want to date someone boils down to the fact that they're trans, that's transphobia right there. If you don't want to date a trans woman because you want kids, well, you better be keeping that same attitude with cis women who are infertile, or that's transphobia.
People have the choice and freedom to date anyone based on their own preferences and attractions. Forcing or pressuring anyone to be in a relationship is obviously wrong, but love cannot be forced. It would just end up being a waste of time and emotional energy for both parties involved. Dating preferences aren't the only things that have been attempted to be forced upon others, but so has the use of pronouns.
These are not my preferred pronouns. These are my pronouns. You will use them, or you will not refer to me. At all.
There are a few issues with preferred pronouns. Second-person pronouns are used when talking to someone directly, such as you, your, yours. Third-person pronouns are used when referring to someone who's not around, for example, he, she, his, hers. When people suggest or demand that you use their preferred pronouns, they're asking for you to use those preferred pronouns when you're talking about them, even when they're not around. They would have no idea whether you do or not, and yet they care about it so much. Pronouns are based on objective biological reality, but just because around 1% of the world's population doesn't use those objective standards, doesn't mean everyone else needs to ask for everyone's pronouns and not assume them. Also, pronouns are like adjectives. You can't force people to describe you a certain way. Another issue with preferred pronouns like they, them, is they are grammatically incorrect. They, them is used when talking about two or more people, so using these pronouns for one person would make the discussion confusing.
Who are we talking about?
In the previous video, I identified as omnigender and used everyone, everybody pronouns. Here's a sentence I made. Everyone can have personal beliefs, but everyone should also respect other people's beliefs. There are 4 ways this could be interpreted with proper grammar. Each instance of the word everyone can have one of 2 meanings, causing each sentence to mean different things. Yeah, if not used correctly, pronouns can be extremely confusing.
Bring me everyone. What do you mean everyone?
Here's a third issue with preferred pronouns.
If I said my pronoun was hottest man alive, that was my genuine pronoun, would you feel obliged to call me that every day? Hey, hottest man alive? No, you wouldn't, would you? No. So, in other words, it all depends who decides what they want to be called.
And isn't that what we're discussing? The fact that I don't have to do that,
so why do we have to call? Why do we have to call Sam Smith they?
Because we're respecting their
so why don't you respect
choice.
Me? That's my choice.
When do I have to
it's my choice.
When do I have to call you?
I want to be called hottest man alive.
Hottest man alive.
Yes,
all the time.
That is my choice, and I demand you respect it.
The point hottest man alive made was, why can the world demand others to respect their pronouns, but the world can choose not to respect others' pronouns? It's a double standard. Some responses to this argument I've seen are, the people who say that aren't serious, or the pronouns are ridiculous. If the determining factor for people to use someone else's pronouns is based on their own opinion on whether the person is serious or not, then non-woke people don't need to use woke pronouns because they think they're delusional. Another response I've seen is, Why should woke people be respectful to others when others aren't respectful to the woke? If anyone is to be respectful to anyone, it's the woke, considering how much they claim to be inclusive, respectful, and tolerant of others. When talking about offending others, here's a quote. If you are silent about your beliefs because you are worried someone will be offended, then your beliefs are not that important to you, but rather, what people think about you is. When you stand up for what's true and right, you will receive both hate and love, but everyone will know what you are fighting for. Piers Morgan's guest said that using people's preferred pronouns means you're respecting their choice, but like you've probably heard many times before, respect is not something to be demanded, it must be earned. This becomes a huge issue when that respect is given to criminals who don't deserve it. This isn't a one-time occurrence because this article lists 7 other times it's happened. It's crucial to describe criminals accurately, otherwise it can cause dangerous confusion. Imagine an article titled, "Ruthless Bear Kills 10 People." Everyone would be freaking out and thinking a wild bear is in the area, but the bear is just someone who identifies as a bear wearing a bear costume.
Oh, this bear can stick and move. He's moving, he's dodging, he's weaving. Look at him. Oh, Jesus.
The article goes further into the implications of this inaccurate reporting if you want to check it out for yourself later. Also, this article reports how calling criminals convicts is offensive and instead call them persons of lived experiences. That's so vague that it's meaningless. In an attempt to be respectful, the woke have also demanded the use of gender-inclusive terms like these. If you're thinking these terms are used on a small scale by random people, it's not. You have schools teaching this to students, teachers getting in trouble for misspeaking, the NHS, doctors, news articles, the military, guests on talk shows, or even sometimes the hosts themselves are promoting the use of these gender-inclusive terms. One example by doctors I'll single out is use egg producing, not female. Say scientists in call to hose out binary language. And what, instead of male we should use sperm producing or non-egg producing? So with the goal to exclude binary terms like male and female, they've opted to use binary terms.
Where did that bring you? Back to me.
The reason for all these terms is to promote equality and inclusivity, as it acknowledges and respects the diverse identities and experiences of all individuals. But this idea has the same hypocritical issue as pronouns, proven with a simple question.
Where's the message of the day? Love. Love everyone, accept everyone for who they are, their differences, their inequalities, like just tolerance and love and acceptance. What do you think of Donald Trump? Him. Oh God, die.
Another issue with gender-inclusive terms is that they're vague and confusing. For example, birthing person instead of pregnant woman. It's implying that women aren't the only ones that can get pregnant, but so can men. However, it's not biological men getting pregnant, but biological women identifying as men. If people are who they identify as, then if someone identifies as a wolf and gives birth, should the article headline read, "Wolf gives birth to a human baby, experts are baffled." The last thing to mention is the term cis. Dictionary.com states, cis is short for cisgender, which refers to when a person's gender identity corresponds to their sex as assigned at birth. Cis is Latin, meaning on the near side of. One reason people don't want to be called cis is because it was coined by this guy, a pedosexual.
Pedal faster! I can't go any faster!
Where you going, kids? Hey, I just want to talk to you. Why don't you come over to my place for a glass of wine and a couple of fruit pies, and then we can go in the back room and play crazy snakes.
When people have asked not to be referred to as cis, the woke respond by basically saying, no, we'll call you whatever we want regardless of whether you like it or not. I found this video which is the best explanation of this issue I've seen.
The women who are telling you not to call them cisgendered, who you continue to call cisgendered, you are literally misgendering them because they're identifying as a woman in the sense of being an adult female, which is in fact a gender identity and should be respected. Because see, to be cisgendered is not only to internally identify with the gender norms, expectations of behavior, likes, dislikes, all of that. But it's also for your outward expression to align with those stereotypes. And because of the way in which so many of us were raised, we don't identify with those social norms of expectations on behavior, likes, dislikes, actions, or anything. We don't associate our being female with anything other than just being female.
If someone calls me a cis man, that's incorrect. Cis man would imply that I identify as a man, but I don't, because I am a man. There's a difference.
But biologically?
Other than biologically, how do you know you're supposed to be a boy?
Your question doesn't make sense. I'm not supposed to be anything. I am a boy. Biologically, that's it.
It's like if we created the term cis-human. We don't identify as human. We are human. You don't often hear Muslims say, I identify as a Muslim, or Jewish people say, I identify as Jewish. No. They say, I am a Muslim, I am Jewish, I am black.
I am gay, I am disabled, I am a woman.
You would only identify as and or transition into something when that something is what you're not. It's why we don't see biological men and women becoming trans men and trans women respectively. It only happens the other way around. This is further evident because if I were to say, I'm transitioning into a human, you might think, what were you before? Because of this, when the woke say trans men are men and trans women are women, the statements are contradictory, because if trans people are who they say they are, they wouldn't have transitioned in the first place. There are two main types of gender-affirming healthcare options for someone with gender dysphoria: sex reassignment surgery or hormone-related care. Let's talk about sex reassignment surgery first. There are two main types. Phalloplasty is female to male, and vaginoplasty is male to female. Usually for the surgeries to happen, the sex organs would need to be removed. What a lot of people don't know are the side effects and the risks involved. Researchers from the Women's College Hospital in Ontario, Canada, analyzed the medical records of 80 patients who sought care from the clinic between 3 months and 5 years after having the operation. More than half of trans women who have bottom surgery are in so much pain years later they need medical attention. Up to a third of patients also struggled to use the toilet or suffered sexual issues 12 months after the operation. Campaigners say the findings demonstrate that complex surgeries like vaginoplasty often carry risks that patients are unaware of at the time when there has been a dramatic uptick in the number of gender reconstruction surgeries in the US and Canada. This graph lists the different reported symptoms of vaginoplasty patients. Of the 80 trans women sampled in the Canadian study, almost 54% reported ongoing pain up to 2 years after the vaginoplasty surgery. Many had more than one symptom. One of the symptoms is a dilation-related concern affecting 46.3%, and I found a trans woman who went through this.
I do not regret surgery. However, I knew recovery was going to be hard, but nobody tells you that it could be this hard. But yeah, I was diagnosed with vaginal stenosis, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically when scar tissue gets built up inside of the vaginal canal to the point where it's like extremely tight and uncomfortable. And the thing is, for the first year after getting bottom surgery, you have to dilate your vagina religiously because it's a brand new canal. And now that I have this stenosis, I physically cannot dilate. My vagina still has depth, but it's so tight to the point that it could start to close and form pockets that could lead to infection, which means that I have to get another surgery.
It would be interesting to know whether the people who had these surgeries fully knew the risks and complications, because if not, it raises serious questions about the validity of their informed consent before the medical procedures. There's a saying that sex reassignment surgery or any gender medical help is life-saving medical care. Life-saving typically refers to actions to prevent a life-threatening situation caused by external factors like accidents, illnesses, etc. However, someone threatening to self-terminate or self-harm if they don't get gender medical care is an external factor, so it's not life-saving. If a boy threatens to self-terminate because he didn't get another piece of chocolate, does that make the chocolate life-saving?
No.
Sometimes this threat is just a manipulative tactic to get whatever they want without intent to do anything to themselves. If they are serious though, the problem is not the chocolate, it's the person's emotional well-being and mental health. That's what should be treated. A possible reason why people think gender medical care is life-saving is because they believe things like this.
If you do have gender dysphoria, the only treatment for that is transition.
Right.
Whether that be just a social transition, a medical transition, whatever transition fits you, that is the only way to heal your gender dysphoria.
This is similar to the claim that being trans is not a choice. Because gender dysphoria is an issue in the mind, not the body, it can be resolved by seeking mental help from a psychiatrist so aligning the body with their gender identity is not the only option. On top of this, people might not realize that someone with gender dysphoria who medically transitions still has gender dysphoria. They are still believing in something that is contrary to their biology, and because gender dysphoria is not something everyone will suffer from for the rest of their life, if that gender dysphoria were to revert back to normal,
what have I done?
The other gender-affirming option is hormone-related, being puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormone therapy. There's a point the woke usually make to justify giving children puberty blockers to trans-identifying children. Have a listen to this.
Puberty blockers have actually been used in cis kids with precocious puberty for a very long time, decades. Precocious puberty being when puberty starts too early, so they use puberty blockers to hold it off a bit till the child is a more appropriate age. There has never been a fuss over cis kids with early puberty having access to puberty blockers in the same way that there has been a fuss over trans kids. They're the same drugs, they're used in the same way to hold off puberty until a child is ready to go through puberty. No one ever gave a shit about puberty blockers until it became widely known that they were used to help trans kids.
Using puberty blockers to stop precocious puberty is not the same as using puberty blockers for trans kids. One stops puberty when it's not supposed to happen, and the other stops puberty when it is supposed to happen. Precocious puberty needs to be stopped ASAP, because if not, one or more of these serious medical issues can occur. Puberty blockers have already been tested for precocious puberty, so the short and long-term side effects are known. But because there's little research into the effects of puberty blockers on children during natural puberty, the children currently using them off-label are basically the guinea pigs. While some studies have been done on this, various issues make them unreliable. We'll talk about those studies later. People who advocate for puberty blockers to treat gender dysphoria are trying to stop facial hair and a deeper voice for boys and breast development for girls caused by natural puberty. However, they might not realize that puberty is also important for these changes. There are 4 claims made about puberty blockers. 2 of them are that they're completely safe and they're fully reversible. One of the drugs often used to block puberty is Lupron. This article not only goes through a bit of Lupron's history, but also includes the issues women have been facing after taking the drug off-label to help short kids grow taller. More than 10,000 adverse event reports filed with the FDA reflect the experiences of women who've taken Lupron. The reports describe everything from brittle bones to faulty joints. A 20-year-old from South Carolina was diagnosed with osteopenia, a thinning of the bones. A 25-year-old from Pennsylvania has osteoporosis and a cracked spine. A 26-year-old in Massachusetts needed a total hip replacement, and a 25-year-old in Wisconsin has chronic pain and degenerative disc disease. Yeah, those conditions aren't reversible. It's a safe bet to say that all types of puberty blockers would have similar long-term side effects as Lupron, because they all perform a similar primary function, blocking puberty. However, the severity and likelihood of the side effects and side effects specific to the drug's ingredients could vary from person to person. When people say that puberty blockers are reversible, it also goes with the claim that puberty blockers are a pause button on puberty, and this tweet is the best explanation for why this is not the case. Children on puberty blockers continue to age chronologically. During this ongoing process of getting older, puberty blockers, if given for long enough, result in missing the crucial window of opportunity to go through puberty and adolescence, which are time-sensitive developmental stages. Children on puberty blockers aren't literally frozen in time. The maturation and development are simply impaired while the rest of the body continues to age. In layman's terms, the child's body continues to get older, but it doesn't grow up.
I never thought of it that way before.
For example, if an 11-year-old were to take puberty blockers for 4 years, their body would be 15 years old, but the body is still functioning like an 11-year-old. There's an imbalance. If the child were to then go off puberty blockers, either puberty won't happen because the window of opportunity is gone, or the biological age won't ever be the same as the chronological age. The bigger this gap, the more serious the child's issues would develop. Either way, natural puberty shouldn't be paused, and puberty blockers' effects aren't reversible. This is also why puberty blockers for precocious puberty is not the same, because a child's body is functioning at a higher age than the chronological age. That imbalance can be corrected.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
There are 2 other claims that are made. One of them is that children can't consent to natural puberty. Nothing that happens naturally needs consent. It's only the things that happen unnaturally that do. People don't consent to being born or aging, and yet it still happens. People don't consent to having cancer, diabetes, menopause, diseases, and illnesses, and they all still happen. It's really bizarre to hear people complaining about the natural course of life.
Yeah, I said it. Complaining/hating. Shout out to all y'all complainers out there.
The other claim is that puberty blockers aren't given to children.
Huh?
That's like saying dog treats aren't given to dogs. It's a contradictory statement. Last time I checked, puberty only happens to children, and the whole purpose of puberty blockers is to block puberty. Giving it to adults for this purpose would be completely useless. If the claim actually means that it's not given to children for gender dysphoria, that's a lie, because it absolutely is. After some time, most children who get put on puberty blockers go on gender-affirming hormone therapy. While it's debated whether puberty blockers cause infertility, hormone therapy certainly will. Firstly, puberty is obviously very important for reproduction from the simple fact that no child ever has gotten pregnant before puberty, and don't be telling me about Lena Medina, because she had precocious puberty. Secondly, a biological boy needs testosterone and a biological girl needs estrogen for reproductive organs to develop properly. If they receive the opposite through hormone therapy, there will be a very high chance of causing infertility. I previously listed a few things that change during puberty that are unrelated to reproduction. Hormone therapy will cause these changes to not develop in a way that's essential for proper physical development. You'd basically be having a boy's body growing like a girl's body and vice versa. The work would love this because a child wouldn't go through the wrong puberty, but apart from specific medical conditions that cause a child to produce the wrong hormone relative to their biology, there is no such thing as a child going through the wrong puberty. A body is born a certain way, and that way will determine whether the child produces testosterone or estrogen. While someone can disagree with the hormone their body is producing, there is nothing wrong if it happens the way it is biologically supposed to. People will say that there's a difference between sex and gender. Well, this is one of them. Someone's gender does not change their sex, and pretending that it does will only cause a lifetime of medical issues. I would somewhat say giving a child hormones that are opposite to their biology would be like putting diesel in a gasoline car. It'll hinder its proper functions, and while the car could run for a short amount of time, it will cause severe internal issues. I say somewhat because you can take a vehicle apart and completely fix it up, but the human body? Not so much. What can be an issue for biological boys transitioning to a girl is if sex reassignment surgery is done after using puberty blockers. This issue was shown on full display when an 18-year-old trans woman died from vaginoplasty. Because puberty blockers were used very early, there wasn't enough penile tissue to create a neo-vagina. What the surgeons had to do instead was to use a section of the patient's bowel, which resulted in fatal necrotizing fasciitis. The patient died of multiple organ failure days later and was revealed to be caused by a deadly strain of E. coli, most likely from the patient's intestines. This isn't the only issue with sex reassignment surgery, as Marcy Bowers, a transgender gender-affirming surgeon, admitted this.
The second was an observation that I had that every single child or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero.
An excellent question that the post-millennial asked about informed consent for children and teens who transition is, how can a child or a preteen who has never experienced sexual satisfaction, orgasm, or sexual intimacy consent to giving that up? A similar question was asked to most likely college students at the University of Oregon.
Do you think a 10-year-old can consent to throwing away adult sexual function?
Like, what do you want me to say to that?
The truth?
It depends on the 10-year-old.
It depends
on the 10-year-old? Depends on the person.
Oh
Not
my
everybody
gosh.
wants sex.
How can a child give informed consent for something that requires experience to be knowledgeable about? Also, children typically won't have any sexual desires prior to puberty because puberty causes libido. For at least the past few years, the pride community has been trying to legally reduce minors' age to receive gender-affirming medical care. One reason for this is once a child has gone through puberty, it can cause unwanted irreversible changes, like facial hair for biological boys. Lowering the age for puberty blockers will give children time to decide what gender they want to be. While we all know there are people who transition and later regret it and detransition, One reason for this attempt to reduce the age of gender-affirming medical care is to reduce a second type of regret, and this next video explains it.
There isn't one regret rate, there are two, and the second regret rate is trans people who regret not transitioning earlier, and that regret rate is massive. What we're doing is correcting an existing regret rate. The decision to do nothing is not a neutral one. You know, we take a stance either way. We have affirmative or we have more resistant, less affirmative models of care, but we're producing regret rates on either side, both directions. And right now we do have a lot of evidence that trans people have been begging and screaming for medical care like this to be accessible earlier, to be more thorough, more available. We don't have evidence to indicate that the number of detransitioners exceeds an acceptable proportion of the total people who have been serviced by transgender healthcare.
If you try to reduce the number of people who regret transitioning earlier by making transgender healthcare options more available to younger children, you're going to end up increasing the number of people who regret transitioning because those younger people have had less time to think about the permanent decisions they're making. People should treat this kind of medical care like some parents treat tattoos. If a child wants a tattoo, a parent might say for them to have an idea of what they want for at least a year, and if the child still wants it after that time, they can have it. But the thing is, tattoos can be removed, and that's how long a child is expected to wait for something that's reversible. What's not reversible is sex reassignment surgery, and depending on the amount of time used for, puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormone therapy. So, it would only make sense for a child to wait longer than a year, maybe even 5 years minimum. Here's the thing, what's worse, someone only being able to transition maybe around 90% instead of 100% because they didn't transition earlier, or someone who regrets transitioning and is now infertile? To me, there's no comparison. One is 100 times worse than the other. While there are two types of regret, a third statistic could be included in this discussion. People who could have had transgender healthcare, but are thankful they didn't. Those people could have been in the regret transitioning group if they had transitioned, increasing that number as a hypothetical. Speaking of regret, listen to what Rachel Levine said during an interview.
You know, my transition was very different because for many reasons, professional and mostly personal reasons, I transitioned over 10 years. Okay? Most people don't take that long to transition. First of all, young people are not willing to do that anymore. And you know, I mean, I don't know if I was 15 now, I don't know if I would have taken so long. So I took a long time. I don't regret any of that. And so another thing I would tell is I have no regrets. I have no regrets. But I have no regrets because if I transitioned when I was young, and I wouldn't have my children. I can't imagine a life without my children. And so every experience led me to here. And so how could I regret that?
How can Rachel go through those lifelong experiences, acknowledge that possibly both children wouldn't exist if Rachel was 15 now and transitioned, and have children and love them so much to not be able to imagine a life without them, but still support and advocate for minors to have procedures that take away their ability to have children?
That just makes no sense.
The other question about sex reassignment surgery is whether adults should be legally allowed to have it as well. You might say, of course they can. They can make that decision themselves because they're adults. The thing is, there are situations where that's not the case. Self-termination or self-harm is not indulged. If someone expresses those desires, we don't provide them with a weapon or instrument to do so, even if they claim it makes them feel better. If gender dysphoria is to be recognized as a mental illness, then it should not be affirmed in any way, shape or form. This would be no different for people who identify as transabled, people who willingly want to amputate healthy limbs. They want to be blind, deaf, paraplegic, etc. The way doctors treat gender, transracial and transabled identities would be similar if they affirmed anorexic people and encouraged them to lose more weight because they feel fat. Feelings are very subjective, so when someone says they feel like they were born in the wrong body, does that mean they should go ahead with gender-affirming medical treatments? There are standards and guidelines to provide an accurate diagnosis to develop appropriate treatment plans. If someone says to a doctor, "I feel like I have cancer," it doesn't mean the doctor should then go and wheel the person to the surgery room. Considering how expensive the medical bills can get, doctors would absolutely love it if it were that simple. RT.com discussed the cost of gender-affirming procedures with Dr. Curtis Crane, a plastic surgeon who performs transgender surgery in Austin, Texas. A biological female undergoing an operation to become male can cost between $150,000 to $200,000, while a male to female operation is between $80,000 and $100,000. However, these are just the prices of the initial operations. After surgery, patients face a lifetime of purchasing estrogen and testosterone hormones, while routine medical checkups are also a priority. These additional expenses can quickly add up to several $100s per month, depending on each individual case. When asked if the pharmaceutical industry stands to profit from the upsurge of interest in the transgender movement, Dr. Crane responded, "Yes, I believe so."
This is my life as someone who has been both chemically and surgically castrated. I am now owned by the pharmaceutical industry. Okay? This is not fun. This is not glamorous. This is not cool. This is not part of any trend, okay? This is serious shit. I have no freedom. I am owned by these, okay?
Once someone transitions, they're forced to be a patient for life. What's not forced is pressing the like button, and doing so can help this video be recommended to others. Thank you. Studies like these suggest that gender-affirming hormones have favorable mental health outcomes. This particular study was funded by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is against laws regulating or restricting gender-affirming medical treatments for children. It's also funded by pharmaceutical industries Arbor and Pfizer, which both produce drugs for gender-affirming medical treatments. Because of this, it's not surprising that Pfizer would support transgender people, because they make Pfizer a lot of money. The study also says the funding sources of this study played no role in study design, data collection, data analysis, or data interpretation, but this article goes into why this would not be true. The last place to go to know whether to have transgender medical care is doctors who financially benefit from said care. You can't guarantee they're saying yes because they have your best interest at heart or because they want a bigger paycheck. What's important to discuss is the high rate of self-termination among the Pride youth. This article by the Trevor Project states that these youths are more than 4 times as likely to attempt self-termination than their peers. More than 1.8 million of these youths between the ages of 13 to 24 seriously consider self-termination each year in the US, and 45% seriously considered attempting self-termination in the past year, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. I was wondering what's causing these numbers to be unusually high, something more than just discrimination, and I realized that one possible reason is in the statistics. Have a look at these points. Do you see the problem? Pause now if you need more time to guess it yourself. The problem is they need so much acceptance and validation from others because they're so sensitive. These children haven't been raised to be tolerant of others or to not care about what other people say. It should be known to the Pride community that the woke gender ideology is not something that the world entirely agrees upon. Most people believe it's a load of crap, and yet, if they get misgendered or called the wrong pronoun, they freak out, have a temper tantrum, and expect everyone to apologize for saying something they disagree with.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
Safe spaces in colleges exacerbate this issue, as it's where people can run to simply to avoid their problems, not solve them, because anything the person is uncomfortable hearing or doing won't happen there. Exposure therapy is a good way for people to overcome their issues, but that won't happen there either. If these people weren't coddled so much and were raised to cope with the harsh reality that many others are preoccupied with their own lives to not care about validating the feelings and opinions of others, it's likely they wouldn't be self-terminating at such a high rate. There's another possible reason, which is that transgender people have a mental illness that's not being treated, and in the attempt to become something they biologically cannot, the cognitive dissonance created from their self-perception of reality eventually becomes too much. I came across many comments from various places saying, "We just want to live our lives." What this is supposed to mean is they don't want to get involved with the world and just want to live a peaceful, quiet and private life. Members of the Pride community might say this, however, they repeatedly do the opposite. Here's a list of the many words changed to be gender inclusive because they got offended. They demanded and got an entire month to celebrate themselves because they identify as anything but straight and the way they were born as, and they try to cancel any company that doesn't support them. That's just to list a few. People who truly live by this phrase would prefer to tailor their lives to fit the world they live in, rather than trying to tailor the world to fit their individual needs. Of all the trans people, about 1% of them detransition, that is, reversing the gender identity or gender transition process. There's a point the Pride community make about detransitioners, and Jamie Ryan said it after hearing what a detransitioner said in the What is a Woman trailer.
I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a male. I will never be a man.
Oh. No, no, do not agree with that. 99.99999% of trans men will very strongly disagree with that statement. I don't know if that person actually identifies as a trans man. By the sounds of it, they were assigned female at birth and transitioned in the sense of taking testosterone and living within society as a man. But yes, sure, for the purposes of your seemingly transphobic documentary, go and find one of the very, very few trans people who holds these kind of gender critical transphobic-y views on trans people and include them. Ignore the many thousands and the vast majority of trans people who will very strongly disagree with this very, very small number of trans people who will say things like this.
If detransitioners' views and opinions don't matter because they're a small percentage compared to the majority of trans people, then by that logic, trans people's views and opinions don't matter because they're a small percentage compared to the majority of humanity. It's understandable why the trans community would ignore and disregard detransitioners because their very existence goes against the various trans communities' ideologies. However, it's still important to acknowledge them and why they detransitioned. Ignoring them would lead to people having survivorship bias, for example. It occurs when researchers focus on individuals, groups, or cases that have passed some sort of selection process while ignoring those who did not. Survivorship bias can lead researchers to form incorrect conclusions due to only studying a subset of the population. The website included a hilarious real example of this during World War II. There are a lot of studies done to say people who go through hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and/or sex reassignment surgery are beneficial. However, when I looked into them more closely, a lot are riddled with methodological issues, whether it's not enough participants, a high rate of participant dropouts, or short follow-up time after procedures, to name a few. Expanding on the last issue a little bit, people who have these medical procedures will most likely be positive about it within 5 years. Most of the studies done don't follow up on people at least a decade later, meaning they're useless to know if those medical procedures are truly beneficial in the long run and whether these procedures should continue to be done. One example of a study with some of these issues looked at the long-term outcomes after gender-affirming surgery with a 40-year follow-up study. The follow-up time is great, but out of the 97 patients who were seen for gender dysphoria at a tertiary care center from 1970 to 1990, only 15 agreed to participate in the phone interview and survey. That's a considerable drop-off and could be an example of survivorship bias. What happened to the other 82 patients? Why didn't they participate? Have they got any health issues or problems from their medical procedures? Do they regret the surgery? Because the study doesn't consider this, it concluded that gender-affirming surgery is a durable treatment that improves overall patient well-being. High patient satisfaction, improved dysphoria, and reduced mental health comorbidities persist decades after gender-affirming surgery without any reported patient regret. Another study examined numerous other studies available at the time on the quality of life after male-to-female sex reassignment surgery. A table was included that laid out the quality characteristics of each study, and many of them have the same issues stated before. While some people might intentionally or unintentionally use these male-to-female surgery studies to say all types of sex reassignment surgery are beneficial, others could possibly use studies of participants who transitioned as adults to say it's okay to transition minors. Minors and adults have distinct physiological and psychological differences. Trying to say a gender medical treatment is fine for minors because it's fine for adults can lead to inaccurate assumptions and potentially harmful decisions. It would be like saying it's fine for minors to watch a horror movie because the adults barely reacted to it. While I saw a couple of other smaller studies that concluded a reduction in quality of life after sex reassignment operation, there was only one study in particular that doesn't have those methodological issues that was published in February of 2022. The study was a long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery in Sweden. What's significant about this study is it was aware of the methodological issues of other studies and had a solution for this, a long-term population-based controlled study. It had 324 sex reassignment persons in Sweden from 1973 to 2003. The study's results were, the overall mortality of sex reassignment persons was higher during follow-up than for controls of the same birth sex, particularly death from self-termination. sex reassignment persons also had an increased risk of self-termination attempts in psychiatric inpatient care. Comparisons with controls matched on reassigned sex yielded similar results. It concluded, "Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group." A quick note about this study is it also states, "The study's design sheds new light on transsexual persons' health after sex reassignment. It does not, however, address whether sex reassignment is an effective treatment or not." More so recently, there's been a lot of detransitioners speaking out about their transition, whether it's criticizing medical complications, how they medically transitioned at such a young age, or how the individual and or their parents were manipulated to go through with their transition when doctors tell the child's parents this.
My parents were told by my doctors that there was no choice other than having a dead daughter or a living trans son.
You know, my parents were told, do you want a dead daughter or a living son? That's not an appropriate way to talk about that.
If the woke community genuinely cared about children and their transitioning process, they would actually listen to detransitioners more than the successful transitions, because failures provide insights into the mistakes made, allowing necessary adjustments to be implemented to lead to better outcomes. With the high rise of children transitioning today compared to a decade ago, the number of children rush to become transgender because they play with opposite gender toys for 1 second, and the ignorance towards detransitioners' reasoning for detransitioning, we are most likely going to see a skyrocket of detransitioners within a decade. It could be 1,000% increase or 4,000%. Whatever it is, it's not going to look good. Woke parents and non-woke parents raise their children based on different beliefs of gender identity. If non-woke parents have a biological boy, they'll still treat the child as a boy even after doing stereotypical girl things. Woke parents, however, will treat their boy as a girl if he does stereotypical girl things and will validate the boy's self-perceived identity. Because of how much a voice the woke has, and another reason we'll discuss later, it's starting to be seen as child abuse if parents don't fully support their children's gender identity, as parents are losing rights to their children. They're losing custody, can be punished, or can do nothing to stop actions done to transition their children. Parents' rights are not only an issue in the government, but also in the schools. Schools have gone behind the parents' backs to transition their children without parents' knowledge or consent. If a child knows themselves so well where they can consent to permanent gender-affirming care, then they should also be able to consent to any of these choices, right? If not, then the reasoning for transitioning children isn't really about allowing them to make choices for their own body, but could be about wanting to make every child trans and or be part of the pride community. Since straight people aren't included in the community, trying to influence children to be anything but straight would only make sense. Going back to the topic of schools, there are examples of multiple students being punished for saying things that others disagree with. For example, when a 12-year-old was sent home after wearing a shirt that said there are only 2 genders, or where a teacher confronted a student in an American school 4 years ago.
Because I was saying that what's wrong with the website is that there are more than one gender in this country.
That's your opinion.
That is my opinion, and that is an opinion which is acceptable in the school. I'm afraid yours, which you're saying that there's no such thing as anyone other than male or female, is not inclusive.
Scientifically, there are just 2 genders, depending on what
I get that.
gender
But you're choosing to make an issue of this, because I said, are you really going to hear? That was your opportunity to keep quiet.
There are many other examples of teachers doing this to students, and these are some I could find in a short amount of time. But there are also examples of teachers getting punished for not affirming students' genders, for saying the wrong thing or having wrong think. I've often seen teachers conflate the meaning of sex and gender. They'll say that you can change your gender, but also say that you are what you identify as. While it could be said that you can change your gender, it's impossible to change your biology. If children don't know the difference and biology's limitations, it'll lead to a lot of confusion and mental health issues. While students and teachers are getting punished, so are parents when they do this at school board meetings.
I'm here today to talk about this book here. My name is John Amanchukwu, as I've stated earlier. It's called It's Perfectly Normal for Students 10 and Up. I'll read some of this for you. It says, after a bit, a person's vagina becomes moist and slippery, and the clitoris becomes hard. After a bit, a person's penis becomes erect, stiff, and larger.
Pastor.
Sometimes a bit of clear fluid that may contain a few sperm comes out of the tip of the penis and makes
Pastor.
it wet.
Can we, sir, I'm sorry.
Was it something I said? Was it something I said? If you don't want to hear it in a school board meeting, why should children be able to check it out of the school system?
There are dozens of videos like this of parents reading books approved by schools, and when they do, the mic is cut off, they've been kicked out of the meeting, or most commonly told to stop reading. In this instance, the board member could have wanted him to stop reading because there were children in the room, or because the meeting was broadcast live with a video labeled for kids. Regardless of which one it is, it proves the parent's point that if it is not appropriate to read that sort of book in the school board meeting, it is not appropriate for children to read it themselves.
That is totally inappropriate.
This is really a question of whether children can handle all of the sexual stuff to where it won't be detrimental to their mental health in the future. There has been this push by some people that children's innocence is not something that should be preserved because they can handle adult topics like sexuality. This reminds me of the time the dean of students from the school in Chicago was secretly filmed bragging about giving 14 to 18-year-olds this.
During Pride, we do a Pride Week every year, and I had like our LGBTQ plus health center come in. They were passing around butt plugs and dildos to my students, talking about queer sex, using lube versus using spit.
And everybody's cool with that, like the butt plugs and the dildos. Nobody complains.
No.
I mean, if the parents found out, would they?
No. It's queer sex.
Apparently, giving minors adult toys to play with is fine because it's to do with queer sex, but if it's to do with straight sex, it's not okay. When it comes to who should go to which bathroom in school, it's quite interesting. Before all of this transgender stuff, people would say if women felt uncomfortable by somebody, to let someone know so the issue can be resolved and they can feel safe. Now if women say they are uncomfortable with a trans woman in the bathroom, they're accused of being transphobic or a bigot and their concerns are disregarded. Allowing horny teenage boys to go in the girls' bathroom while the girls are changing by simply identifying as a girl is a recipe for disaster. There's already a problem with gender-neutral toilets. This isn't any different. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that every trans person is a rapist. No. What I am saying is some boys will take advantage of this situation by simply identifying as a girl without needing to prove anything. Some might say boys wouldn't go to those lengths to do that, but boys have pretended to be gay for years to be invited to girls' sleepover, hoping to have some fun time.
I was acting.
Also, what's to say boys wouldn't do what this teacher did? Acting transgender in class to wear massive prosthetic boobs, and then dressing normally in public. Having boys near girls in their most vulnerable state is a bad idea. If dangerous situations can be avoided, they should be, especially when it comes to the safety of children. Similar to boys identifying as a girl and going into the girls' bathrooms, trans women have requested to move to women's prisons. There's been a lot of backlash of prisons doing this because some of these criminals were convicted of sexual assault on women.
What if he raped me? What if she raped you?
Putting a male rapist in a female prison after they identify as a woman is like putting a child serial killer in a juvenile prison because said person identifies as a 12-year-old. A male rapist in a female prison is an all-you-can-grape buffet. I found these 3 examples of trans women who, even though have a history of rape or serious sexual offenses against women, were placed in women's prison. 2 of them sexually assaulted different inmates at separate times and locations. There's also the risk of trans women inmates impregnating other inmates, which happened a year ago. The Correctional Service of Canada studied gender-diverse offenders and it surveyed 99 gender-diverse inmates between 2017 and 2020. Found that of 61 male inmates in the study who identified as transgender or something other than male, 46% had committed sexual offenses and 92% were incarcerated for violent crime, including 41.6% for homicide. They make an interesting point. No females who identified as transgender men sought to transfer to a men's prison.
I wonder why.
You might be asking, why would trans women want to move? Well, it tends to be that when an inmate finds out another inmate was convicted of a sex offense, they tend to see the Grim Reaper quite quickly. This is why we see a lot of prisoners transitioning after being locked up. This article from The Guardian reports that California state prisoners are killed at a rate that is double the national average, and sex offenders account for a disproportionate number of victims, according to an Associated Press analysis of corrections records. Male sex offenders make about 15% of the prison population, but accounted for nearly 30% of homicide victims since 2007. Because of this, it's not far-fetched to say males convicted of sexual offenses would fake becoming trans to be moved to women's-only prisons. It's easy because they're not having to prove anything about their gender identity. If they say they're transgender, then they're transgender. Speaking of transgender people, if it's possible for people to become transgender, then it's true for everyone. I've often heard woke people say that a trans woman, for example, has always been a woman even prior to transitioning. They just haven't identified that way. It's also said that trans people are oppressed. What happens when you put those 3 points together? Well, it means over 8 billion people are potentially trans, which would make us all oppressed. It also makes gender meaningless because stating you're trans would be like stating you're human. With trans people being oppressed, I have this. If you can get someone fired for expressing your opinion, you're not the oppressed, you're the oppressor. I don't want to make this video longer than it already is, so I'm going to list many situations that shouldn't have happened but did because of this woke gender ideology. Mother's Day got cancelled because woke parents were offended, people needed to apologize for saying biological facts like only women can procreate, anthropologists can't identify human remains as male or female, the Facebook and Instagram lifting the breast ban but only for trans and non-binary users, parents raising their children as babies are asked if they are trans, people suggesting that parents should be replaced if they don't support their LGBT children, tampons being placed in men's bathrooms, trans women sponsored by tampon companies, biological men taking biological women's place in ads, businesses needing to follow a woke quota, characters in kids' TV shows identifying as non-binary and using biologically incorrect pronouns, trans women winning beauty pageants. Time out for just a sec. Be honest. Who looks better? Now, who won? Let's continue. Trans women are winning women's awards, the military requiring troops to use gender-neutral language, trans women not telling the men they date they're trans women trying to breastfeed an infant, protests including a trans school shooter as a victim, and a trans teacher continued to work for weeks after wanting to shoot some students.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
There are 3 final things to discuss. Within the past year, drag shows have been introduced in Pride and many drag queens are now performing in front of children. What's questionable is whether drag queens are an inherently sexual thing and should only be for adult entertainment. But what is sexual is drag queens dancing like this for children. Videos of drag queens doing these sexualized dances for children are endless. Why are they acting like strippers in a strip club? If you were to replace the drag queens with strippers and have them do the exact same act, the strippers would be arrested on multiple charges. There's even a video of a drag queen teaching children how to twerk.
And you're crouched down into this sort of position here, so your bum's sticking out. I hope you're taking this all in. And then you just move your bum up and down like that.
In some drag shows, the drag queens and the parents would have the children hand the drag queen money or place it in the drag queen's clothes, or lack thereof. How comparable are they trying to be to strippers? Next thing you'll know, children can pay for a private dance with the drag queen. What's not appropriate is when children are involved in these drag shows, not just watching, but dancing, and not just dancing with the drag queens, but dancing as a drag queen. I don't think I have to explain why sexualizing children and teaching them to dance like a stripper is a word that starts with G, ends in R, and rhymes with rumor. What I will say about it is, if it's not appropriate for a child to watch a stripper dance, it is not appropriate for a child to dance like a stripper.
Somebody come get her, she dancing like a stripper. Somebody come get her, she dancing like a stripper.
For years, the right has been saying that the pride community is not only after their children, but all children. In response, the woke have said that's not true and it's a right-wing conspiracy theory. But this conspiracy theory is based on what they've done. I've got two prominent examples. In June of 2021, a video titled "A Message from the Gay Community" performed by the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus was published with controversial lyrics. The yellow highlights are the questionable parts, and the green highlights are acceptable. But if you consider that many of the pride community have this mentality where you can't question or disagree with them, otherwise it's seen as hate speech, bigoted or transphobic, these lyrics take on a different meaning. As the saying goes, actions speak louder than words, and so while they might say all this stuff, more often than not, they tend to do the opposite. Also, they tried to claim the video was satire, but if that's true, they took it a bit too seriously because 8 of the 9 performers are possibly on the sex offender registry, with at least 4 of them having acted on children. This video goes into more detail about it.
We're obliged to admit the crimes for which we were convicted. We're not here to start no trouble. We're legally required to do the sex offender show.
The second more recent example is during a Pride event this year, they chanted this. What's interesting is after that, NBC News tried to justify the chant by saying the "Coming for Your Children" chant has been used for years at Pride events, according to longtime march attendees and gay rights activists. If it has been going on for years, it further proves the point that "Coming for Your Children" agenda is not a conspiracy theory. On the topic of Pride events, a lot are being heavily criticized for what's being included, specifically nudity. Videos of these Pride events have shown numerous people nude. This would all be fine if these events were done in private and didn't include children, but that's not the case. Members of the Pride community have defended the idea of nudity and kink in Pride events because it allows self-expression, and articles like these encourage parents to bring their children to these events. Here's the issue. If a regular person were to walk in public nude, they would be arrested quite quickly. But if that same person were to do it at a Pride event, that's somehow fine? If you think this isn't true, here's a guy asking a police officer about this double standard.
If you want to be out in the street, you have to be fully clothed and you can't be naked or anything like that, right?
Well, I mean, there are naked people running around on the street.
Okay, but is that against the law?
That would be some mental health issues.
Oh, okay, I agree with you on that one. I'm having a hard time. Yesterday I seen a bunch of people naked in front of children and police officers, seeing men with their penis out in front of kids, and I'm just wondering if that's acceptable.
Was that part of the Pride, you mean? Was that on the weekend?
Yeah, it was at the Pride Parade.
Yeah, so that's always the issue then each year. Yeah.
What's the issue with that? Sorry.
Well, I mean, that happens every year.
Oh, so it's kind of like it's okay for when it's at the Pride Parade, but not in other situations, obviously?
Exactly. I would say so.
A counter argument I've seen when people criticize the sexual nature of Pride events is, if you don't like it, don't go. That would be like saying if you don't like domestic abuse, don't abuse your partner, while also implying if you do like it, then all the power to you. If something is morally wrong, it doesn't matter whether someone likes doing it or not. That's irrelevant. They shouldn't be doing it. As I said before, others have accused the Pride community of being the word that rhymes with rumors. This isn't helped by the fact that the Pride community support these types of people by not only having a flag that has colors to represent their sexuality, but has given them a different name. MAPS stands for Minor Attracted Persons. While not everyone in the Pride community supports this, it's extremely concerning that there have been attempts to normalize this type of criminal behavior, as it would only cause more children to be taken advantage of. There's a group called Gays Against Rumors, and you would think that everyone would support them, but apparently not. Then there's also article titles like this. Are they suggesting that LGBT people are sex offenders? If they don't want to be called rumors, then they should stop being proud to support them. The thing about the woke gender ideology is there are so many logical inconsistencies, logical fallacies, and contradictions because it's not based on facts, it's based on opinions and feelings, so it's not an ideology that'll last long. Detransitioners are an example of the reality of the ideology. When the topic of detransitioners comes up in a discussion, they would be quick to ignore them and disregard their experiences because it goes against their beliefs. One belief is that children know who they are and are knowledgeable enough to make permanent life-changing decisions. I found this clip of a gender-fluid person unintentionally admitting this not to be true.
Even if a child did misgender me, I would not blame the child because they don't understand the ramifications of their actions.
That one line contradicts the entire trans community, which is why the original video is deleted. Sadly, people avoid the truth so much that they'll do all these mental gymnastics to make a lie seem true. It's also quite amazing how many things happening today that are considered normal wouldn't have been tolerated more than a decade ago. One reason for this is that if someone disagrees with the pride community on anything, they are accused of being transphobic, homophobic, bigoted, or whatever else, which can lead to being cancelled so people don't tend to question them. Anything under the label of pride is appropriate and cannot be challenged, which basically allows them to do whatever they want.
Excuse me, ma'am. No porn at the bar.
Oh, it's okay. I'm transgender.
Oh, I had no idea. Do whatever you want all the time.
With everything discussed in this video and the previous one, a thought came to me of something the pride community could try to normalize in the future. Something nobody would accept and end up backfiring, causing the end of the pride movement. See if you can guess it as I lead up to the prediction. Like what was discussed before, these pride events have a lot of nudity. An event that took place during the last Pride Month involved naked cyclists. I'm pointing this out specifically because it also included 2 young children, fully clothed, riding a bike. Probably within 1 to 3 years, we'll start to see children participate in these pride events nude. However, this would not be the end of the pride movement, but instead would be one step away from the end. Here's a couple of hints if you haven't figured it out yet. We have seen schools give butt plugs and dildos to students in class. We have seen 4 and 9-year-old students be given masturbation assignments, and we have seen attempts to remove childhood innocence laws. What would be sought to normalize? Adults having sex with minors.
Do you think any 12-year-old can consent to sex with an adult?
It doesn't sound good, but a mature adult that understands the concept of consent. Why should we limit someone by their age? Ooh. Why should we couple age with consent?
I'll take this prediction further by saying we'll probably see articles be published suggesting or promoting adults to have sex with minors. I'll take this prediction even further and say the beginning of the end of the pride movement would be when a video is posted showing adults having sex with minors naked in public and in a pride event during Pride Month. Before said video is released, the woke will say it's not happening and it's a right-wing conspiracy theory. After being released, they'll support it by saying children have the right to express themselves and the children consented to it. They've already claimed that minors can consent to hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and sex reassignment surgery, so it's only a matter of time until they fully advocate for minors consenting to sex. The prediction would probably happen within 5 years, and I'm saying this halfway through 2023. I hope they're not that predictable, but if the prediction happens, that would be the exact moment the pride movement dies. If you enjoyed this video, here's the previous one, looking at how logical the woke gender ideology is. If you've already watched that, YouTube recommends this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.